What's up everyone, the Game 2K2 here again, and today I continue my review of the Harry Potter franchise with the video game adaptation to the Chamber of Secrets. Unlike the Sorcerer's Stone, it's not just two versions of the game this time, it's actually three. The PC has its own version, the PS1 has its own version, and of course the PS2, GameCube, and Xbox have theirs. Because it took so long for me to get it, I'll start with the PS1 version first. The PS1 version of the Chamber of Secrets is pretty much like its version of the Sorcerer's Stone. It's pretty much a free roam based game. You're allowed to explore the castle and on a few occasions other environments depending on where the story takes you, such as Diagon Alley. The core gameplay pretty much has you going through classes and doing various other missions that help you progress through the story. Besides that, there's always the side missions to collect flavored beans that are spread throughout the castle, and of course, after each mission you collect a Witches and Wizards card. To this version's credit, it does follow the story quite well, which the PS1 version of the Sorcerer's Stone didn't do quite as well. The story progresses nicely if you keep doing the missions at a steady pace. However, despite the different story, the core gameplay for the PS1 is almost the exact same as the Sorcerer's Stone, which is a problem. Argonaut Games, who developed the PS1 version, doesn't change much with the core gameplay. In fact, the only thing that they added is the minigames, which would be nice if the minigames were actually interesting. The minigames have you doing things like throwing gnomes and getting to class at the quickest time. There are actually a couple missions from the Sorcerer's Stone that I swear are copied and pasted to the Chamber of Secrets, but are just in different settings. For instance, Harry and Malfoy racing for the snitch in Quidditch in the Chamber of Secrets looks and plays exactly the same as the mission where Harry is chasing Malfoy on his broom in the Sorcerer's Stone. Argonaut's mission with the PS1 version was to make it the more family-friendly version out of the bunch, and it shows because the Chamber of Secrets on the PS1 is not nearly as action-packed as the other versions, and is even less action-packed than the Sorcerer's Stone for the PS1. There is a little bit of action, but none of it is really that challenging. Another element to the gameplay that makes a return is the puzzle elements within the castle, where you have to move objects to certain areas to find something, or go through certain doors. There actually are areas within the castle that you wouldn't think were passageways, but actually are. Classes return for the Chamber of Secrets. It's pretty much the same setup as last time, where you have to complete a certain control scheme that the game gives you. The only thing that bugs me about the classes is that there aren't very many of them. You really only go through the classes once, and I felt they should have done more of them. Now with that being said, there still is one new feature, and that's dueling. Now, this is based off of the dueling that was seen in the Chamber of Secrets film, so obviously this is before we got to see the more fast-paced dueling that would be seen in the film adaptations for the Order of the Phoenix, the Half-Blood Prince, and the Deathly Hallows. So it's much more slow-paced, and it's pretty much one spell at a time. Considering it was a brand new feature, it could have been way worse. It's still not perfect, and the pace of it does make it slightly boring after a while, but it still works fairly well. Then we move on to the controls for this version, which aren't that great. These controls are horribly delayed when it comes to the action buttons. It's so delayed that it will drive even the most patient gamer mad. The navigation isn't too bad though, with your character pretty much moving the way you want him to. The turning is thankfully not as sensitive as similar games. Graphically, I'm sad to say that this is one of the worst looking PS1 games I have ever seen in my life. Now I know some fans might say that for the PS1 it looks like a beautiful game. No. Tony Hawk's Pro Skater was a beautiful PS1 game. Silent Hill was a beautiful PS1 game. Harry Potter and the Chamber of Secrets is a terrible looking game. It almost looks like Argonaut Games ran out of money when the visuals came into play because the game looks like an unpolished mess. The graphical pops are unbelievably big, the character models are horrendous looking, and unfortunately, Hogwarts is really bland in appearance. Overall, it's sort of a fun game on its own if you haven't played the Sorcerer's Stone, but if you have, then I recommend you stick with that game because the PS1 version doesn't offer much in terms of change. Now we move on to the PC version. With the PC version, the game was designed differently than the PS1 version. The game featured more hidden objects to find, and the game didn't have a whole lot of side missions. Now there are similar elements as well, like the classes in the game. For the PC's version of the Sorcerer's Stone, the way the classes ran was that it would give you a shape, and you would use the mouse to trace over the shape, and the better you did, the better your grade. With the Chamber of Secrets, it's almost the exact same, but they decided to add a little more challenge to it, and the way they did that was that they added the keyboard arrow keys. In the shape, there would be arrows pointing to a certain direction, and you have to hit the arrow keys right at the moment when you reach them during the tracing process. However, you have to be perfect with the timing, because even if you are a little off, you will completely miss it. While I did eventually like this change to the lessons, I was stunned at how hard it starts off. Usually with new features on a game, it starts off simple and then it gets more difficult as the game goes on. But the very first lesson is actually rather challenging, and it took me a few tries to get it right. After a class, you go through challenges, which has you use the spells that you just learned, and surprisingly a good number of the mini-missions that were in the PS1 game are incorporated into these challenges. One class that really disappointed me in the game was potions. There's so much potential for a class like that, and you really don't do anything once you're there, and that's kind of sad. The game focuses a little more on Quidditch. You of course play as the Seeker, and to the game's credit, while you only play one position, it actually does feel like Quidditch. You spend the game chasing the snitch, and unlike the future Half-Blood Prince, you aren't going through senseless rings, and it actually feels like you're chasing the damn thing, and the game isn't chasing it for you. The Flavored Beans mission was changed around a bit in the PC version. Now you can go into certain rooms where you have a time limit to collect as many beans as you can, and with the beans you can buy items and Quidditch upgrades. They kind of turned it into a competition with the Flavored Beans because you're competing with the other houses, and I say kind of because it's the easiest competition in the world. Then of course there's the Dueling Club, which is a little more loyal to the movie than the PS1 version was. The way the Dueling Club works for the PC is that you can pretty much duel whenever you want to once you've been introduced to it. However, you are dueling for flavored beans, and if you have enough to offer, you can challenge someone, and whoever wins gets the flavored beans. While actually a good idea, the Dueling Club is a little too robotic. You're not very mobile during the whole thing, and the matches are not very long, which kind of takes the fun away. Now we move on to the controls for the PC version, and overall I like them a lot better than the PS1 version. I like the navigation in the game, and I like the spellcasting for the most part. However, the spellcasting is different depending on what activities you're doing. Regular spellcasting while roaming around the castle and doing most of the challenges are pretty well responsive. Dueling, on the other hand, is very, very slow. You can tap the button several times and you'll only get one or two spells out of it. Graphically, there really isn't much to talk about because the game's running off the same graphics and character models as the Sorcerer's Stone, and for that reason I don't think they're any good, because a year is such a long time in the world of gaming, and the expectations for graphics always becomes bigger, and the PC version doesn't live up to the graphics seen at the time, and it's truly disappointing. Overall, despite not being visually impressive, I actually find the PC version to be a fun version that's definitely worth checking out. Sure, some elements repeat from the first game, but there's still enough new elements as well. Now we move on to the PS2, Xbox, and GameCube versions. This particular version is a little more like the PS1 version in terms of setup with the story. One of the main differences between the PC version and the console versions is that the console version starts you off from the Burrow, while the PC version starts off from Hogwarts. However, the story is pretty much the exact same with a few differences. However, when it comes to this version, the way it tells its story is way better, because instead of dealing with a great deal of narrating, there are a lot more cutscenes, and you actually get to explore a lot more of the areas where the story takes you, instead of only getting glimpses of them. For instance, you actually get to explore the store in Nocturne Alley. Another difference between this version and the others when it comes to the storytelling is the order that it tells it in. This version is not really told in the order of the book or movie. Obviously the intro and the climax are the same, but the order of everything else in between is not. Another huge improvement is the environments. Diagon Alley is much better in this version than the PS1 version because it's not only more lively, but there are a lot more stores that you can access and explore. Hogwarts is definitely much better in this version because, like Diagon Alley, it's more lively and there's more areas to access, but the overall look is more loyal to what's seen in the movie, while the PC and PS1 versions were a bit off. Now we move on to the classes and the missions, which are pretty much a combination of what was seen on the PS1 and what was seen on the PC. However, this version is not really loaded with a lot of side missions. It's more into missions that pertain to the story. First we have the Dueling Club, which is introduced surprisingly early in the game. Pretty much the same thing, however, unlike the PC and PS1 versions, dueling is a little more mobile and is really a lot more challenging and well thought out. This is because blocking is not as easy, aiming the spells is much more difficult, and while a bit on the slow side, it's not as bad as the other versions. However, despite this positive element, you cannot access dueling whenever you want to like the PC version, which is really disappointing because it is the better version. Then we have the rest of the classes, which aren't necessarily regular classes like the other versions. The classes have you going through lengthy challenges through hidden parts of the castle where you have to battle many creatures. The challenges are actually really well done and are one of my favorite elements of the game because they are quite difficult to get through. Then there's Quidditch, which is kind of like the PC version, only enhanced. At first you're taken through a training course, which had me worried because it reminded me a little of the Quidditch that was from the Half-Blood Prince, which I absolutely despised. You are obviously playing Seeker and you have to catch the snitch. You go through rings that help you build your boost so you can go faster. The actual game itself is really great because it actually does feel like a Quidditch match. You get hit by bludgers, the opposing team's players, you can make a mistake and run into the stands, and it's also hard as hell to navigate your character. Also, while the game doesn't have as many side missions as the other versions, it still has a couple. One is broom flying. You can get on your broom at any point in the game and just fly around the outside of the castle. It's a pretty cool feature. The only problem is that it does get boring after a few tries. Then there's also a little side mission with the House Cup competition, which was in the books and movies. It's where the house with the most points at the end of the year gets the cup. I was actually kind of stunned that they put this in the game, but it's actually rather interesting. And of course we have the wonderful side mission of collecting flavored beans. Then we have the controls for the game, which works very well on the Xbox and PS2. Since the game relies a lot on the main action buttons, the Xbox and PS2 controllers are easily the best controllers for this version of the game. The GameCube controller, on the other hand, for me, was a complete mess because Nintendo decided to make the most uneven-looking action buttons ever seen on a controller. When it comes to the spell casting, it's still very delayed on all versions, but it's not nearly as bad as the PS1, but I don't find them to be as good as the PC version. Now we move on to the graphics, which aren't necessarily the best seen on these particular consoles, but the game still looks very solid, with each version looking slightly different from the other. The Xbox comes in first because it just has a really polished look to it, the environments are well detailed, and the many spell effects are really cool. The PS2 and GameCube are not quite as polished in appearance, and the graphical jumps are annoying, but overall the game doesn't look that much different. The PS2 is slightly better than the GameCube, but you really can't tell. Overall, this version is actually really fun, and is one of the very few Harry Potter games that I feel like playing over and over again. Sure, while some elements still leave room for improvement, it is easily the best Harry Potter game thus far. Well everyone, that's it for now. Thank you so much for listening, and I will see you next time.